This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to season 4 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon MacLelland, and I'm delighted to be joined today by a world-renowned expert on performance, Steve Magness. Steve, thank you for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gordon. I'm really excited to be here.
It's absolutely fabulous to have you with us. And I know you've had an amazing career around sport in all the work that you do. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what you're up to now and a little bit about your career to date?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love sport. So growing up, sport was all that mattered. I didn't really care about school or anything else. It was just out on in my field, athletics. So I was a runner and a pretty high level runner, especially at the, high school level. I ran a 401 mile in high school, and sport was all I cared about. And in my own career, I didn't hit my expectations or my goals or what have you. So that kind of pushed me down this path to say, okay, let's understand the science, the physiology, the psychology, it's just like everything you can think of to get better. It kind of pushed me down this path to understand it. And I think initially I was kind of very narrow in the world of running and athletics, but, over my career, it's kind of broadened out to look at, sport in every aspect and even outside of sport and the lessons that we can learn. And now I just say that I help people perform better, whatever that performance kind of is.
Yeah, and your newsletter is that I receive every few weeks, absolutely fantastic. And your latest book, I think, without a doubt, is one of the best things that I've ever read, because I think it's such a complicated topic. I think that so many people talk about resilience, so many people define it in so many different ways. So many people think we can develop it in certain ways. Others do it in something completely different. And you managed to encapsulate all of this in your book, Do Hard Things. So why do we get resilience wrong? So, why did you want to write that so much? What motivated you for that?
It's a topic I've thought about for a very long time, because when you're looking at running, everybody tells you to be resilient, to get tough, it's all in your head and all this stuff. And so I've thought about it for a long time, but what really pushed me towards it is seeing exactly what you said there. Is I would coach athletes, I would talk to parents, I'd go watch games, and everyone agreed that oh, you got to be tough and resilient, but everyone had about a billion different definitions, and some people are doing crazy stuff over here and some people are doing other stuff over here. And I just sat down and was like, all right, we need some direction here, because what I also saw is that in the coaching world, people just tend to default to how they were coached or how they kind of grew up in athletics. And often when we do that, we don't kind of evolve with the latest science and psychology on all that stuff. So I wanted to just put something out that almost provided a roadmap and hopefully gave some nuance to the conversation, and didn't just say do this, but said hey, we got to wrestle with a big meaty topic and subject here. Let's do it some service and try and figure it out at least.
Yeah, and it was absolutely intriguing, and as I say, I really enjoyed it. Now, let's strip it right back to its bare bones. Resilience, if we've done no reading on it, know nothing about sport, haven't been involved in environment, we'll probably picture somebody having to tough it out, or maybe that image of the person doing that extra lap of running or that extra set of shuttles to the point of sheer exhaustion. And if they can get through it in some way, then there's a chance that they've shown some resilience. What do you think our biggest misconceptions are of the word? How do you think most people see it? So let's take sports parents, let's say, who are very similar to what you're saying in sport. They generally parent in a way that their parents parented with them, or their experiences with their own coaches, how they see sport on the media. That's how their behaviours are formed, and that's perhaps what we see at sport. But what do we think resilience, how do you think most people see that?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. And I surveyed gosh, about 100 athletes, parents, coaches, and said, hey, just tell me what you think when you hear this word. And the descriptions were just like you described. It was like the people who push through the pain, like put their head down and just grind or grit their way through things and all that good stuff. And it's a conceptualization of like, oh, this kind of makes sense. But along with that, if you dug deeper, along with it, were I think some ideas that we get wrong. So often you talk to people about resilience, they're like, oh, well, you just push through or bulldoze through the pain. And that gave an indication of like pain is something to avoid, to push away. Like any sort of doubts, insecurities, all that stuff were negative. Like you throw those away. And that ran counter to both what the research and what I was seeing when I was talking to elite athletes. So I'll give you an example. Is I was fortunate to sit down with some of the best marathoners in the US who also happen to be some of the best in the world. And I sat there and I asked, many of them, I said, how often do you think about quitting in a race? And again, these are, major marathon winners. And they were like, oh, every single race I think about quitting. Like I'm looking for the hole in the, to step in or thinking about like, oh, like what would happen if I stepped on the curb of the sidewalk and like just claimed I twisted my ankle. Now they don't actually do it, but just the fact that that is the dialogue that the best of the best are going through made me realize like, oh, okay, when we tell kids as parents, like, hey, you just gotta, like, if you have those negative thoughts or doubts, that means you're not confident enough, you're not tough enough. Like, winners only think about like winning or pushing through or what have you. We're setting them up for failure because that's not reality. And where I think we get things wrong with toughness is we've got to deal with the reality of the situation, which is often it is a struggle. Often we do need to pay attention to those emotions, doubts, feelings, insecurities, what have you. Like, we're all human. Like, I think we paint people when we think of toughness as almost being like superhuman, and that just isn't reality. And when we set people up with that image, we're just going to cause them to feel worse because they think like, oh, I am thinking about quitting. Oh, like these doubts, insecurities, emotions are overwhelming me. I just must not be tough enough. And they just kind of, take it as a negative character trait. And that's just not what it is.
Yeah, it's very complicated, isn't it? And I know you threw sports parents in there, and I think about their behaviours around their children on a weekly basis. And the thing you said about the reality of situations, and the reality is that if you're involved in any form of sport, there are going to be some really good days, there are going to be some really bad ones, there's going to be some brilliant moments, there's going to be some really challenging ones. And I do feel sometimes, even though parents don't necessarily believe that it's all going to be absolutely lovely, I think they do sort of think subconsciously, oh yeah, no, that will be all right. That won't happen to me. That won't happen to my child. And I think they probably do try to remove, let's say, some of the obstacles to achieve an outcome. But actually, what you're saying is, we need to acknowledge it. We need to talk about it. And am I right? Is that where we're heading with these conversations?
Exactly. And actually, there's some wonderful research on high level athletes, including, in the US, we call it soccer, but football for you guys is they found that those who made it to the top of the top had to go through they went through more struggle and more obstacles than those who made it like the level down, who didn't make it to the top leagues or what have you. And there's wonderful research around it. They call it, the researchers summarized it as talent needs trauma. And in this case, not trauma necessarily in the sense of abuse or what have you, but trauma in the sense of obstacles, where if we don't have obstacles, if we clear the way, what tends to happen is inevitably we're going to face some sort of level where we face a setback, or we're not good enough, or we get cut, or we don't like make the starting squad. That's going to happen unless you're, even if you're the best of the best, like it's going to happen at some point. And unless you've been prepared to go through that before, if you haven't, then you tend to spiral. You tend to see that, oh, that setback is a reflection on me. I'm not good enough. Like my motivation goes down, my confidence in my game goes down, and I'm not able to quote unquote be tough. If you've been through some obstacles before, then you've likely developed some of those tools to navigate that difficult situation. And I think that's what we're after. And not to harp on parents too much, but I think this is really ingrained in sport when you look at what parents and coaches do when a kid loses, right? Because that's where we learn how to deal with failure and struggle. If a kid loses and the first thing the parent comes over and is like, oh, the ref like caused you to lose, or like, I'm gonna blame this and this, and like deflect. What does that kid understand but to say, oh, okay, I need to deflect, like this isn't my fault? And when you say, not necessarily that you need to take it all on your fault, but if what you're doing is you're kind of teaching your child to live in a delusion where they don't have to deal with the reality of it. They don't have to maybe come face to face with the fact of like, oh, we lost because maybe I needed to, work on this skill a little bit better, or like maybe my teamwork and my ability to play with my teammates wasn't where it was supposed to be, or what have you, and we don't learn and grow from it. And the other thing that I'll say as well that I think really is in here is how we handle failure and loss impacts our future motivation. So if again, a parent sits there and sees losses, hey, I'm going to blame the ref, or sees losses, they berate the kid saying, how could you do this? Like, this is the worst ever. You lost your city championship, or what have you. What that tends to do is it shifts our motivation from wanting to do it and like a desire to get better because we enjoy the sport. It shifts it to, oh, I'm playing this game out of like fear. I don't want to lose. I'm afraid of failing. And what research tells us and practical experience tells us is that if we play out of a place of fear for too long, like we're not going to perform up to our potential. We're not going to get better. We're not going to grow. We're not going to reach the heights that we can. So we have to be very careful as parents on what kind of motivation we're instilling.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on, I'm really pleased to hear you say that. Having spent some time last night at Premier League Football Academy talking about something very similar, but I think that bit you also said about when we go through things and we're able to talk about them and we're able to refer back to them, as you say, we're developing all the time a really big toolbox. And, when you think about how you can help build confidence back with your children, one of the big things you can call on later when things have gone wrong is, we've been here before. Do you remember what we did last time? It maybe worked quite well. It didn't work so well, but actually this is what we'll try this time. We've been here. We know what we're doing. But the other bit I think is vital in this is that we've got this idea that losing is like the worst thing in the world. I was talking about what tolerable disappointment is last night, because losing in sport should be tolerable. Doesn't mean we have to like it or want to get beat, but it is not the major catastrophe that you sometimes see on a given week in what is just a regular season. And I think the bits with parents, like you say, you used the one about when they come up and they look to make an excuse. I talk about when they perhaps say to the kids, oh, don't worry, it's not that important. Well, they wouldn't be that upset if they didn't think it was important. It's probably not a great start. But then if they're not making an excuse, I know what I'll do. Oh, sorry, or blame, isn't it? Let's make an excuse, or I'll blame somebody else. You said the blame. Oh, you had a runny nose on Monday. Oh, well, you missed training on Thursday. That's why it hasn't worked. And all the time, we're trying to take the pain away for what actually should just be a very normal thing. I mean, the best ones go to McDonald's, Steve. I always joke with parents over here, if you've lost a game and it's the end of the world, what do we do? Oh, we'll take you to McDonald's to take the pain away. Now, in itself, that's not the worst thing in the world, but it's still those types of behaviors, because we're feeling like we're having to overdo love and affection for something that really should just be very normal.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that. I could talk all day about this because it really matters. And I think you brought up the nuance there is we can go too far in both directions here. So if you're saying, oh, it's not a big deal, it's not important, what you're doing is like invalidating that experience. Because obviously, if they're upset, like it is important. So what do you do in those situations? Again, I'm going to come back to this theme all the time. It's like embrace the reality of it. Acknowledge like, yeah, I get it. It is important. Like it does kind of suck to lose. Like, but you can bring perspective on it. You can say, but this is the regular season game of blah, 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 or whatever it is, right? You can bring perspective is okay. What I think is this, and I'll bring in some biology to this, is if you look at when we lose, what happens is if we take it deeply personal. So if we lose the game and we think, oh, this means I myself am a loser, or what happened? What happens is we have a stress response where we have a huge increase in cortisol. Why? Because our brain's like, oh, we're under threat, like feel stress. Okay. What happens is that's okay if it's in the short term. So our stress responses are meant to kind of go up and tell us, hey, you're kind of in danger, threat, but then to come back down after that threat is removed. But often what happens is we linger, we ruminate on it, we turn it into the biggest deal ever. And when we do that, we're just conditioning our brain to say, oh, I guessed right. I should have a bigger stress response next time. And it just becomes our default. So if you're a parent and you're listening, okay, what do you do? Well, the best thing you can do is when you're looking at if they suffer a tough defeat or loss or what have you, is like, give them the space to kind of just deal with it and process it. And this is with young teams, with old teams. This is the best thing you can often do is just send them off with their teammates and be like, hey, you guys talk about it, right? Like, don't have input from the parent or whatever. Like, the kids are going to talk about it and they're going to, discuss it and like get through it. And most of the time after they talk about it, it's like, okay, now we can go to McDonald's or whatever have you. Like, we're over it. We processed it.
And we must understand that they bounce back far quicker than adults. Just as you said there, 20 minutes later, when they've had time to sink in, they're worried about what's on the pizza that evening or what they're doing next with the friends. And there are us sometimes, as the parents, 2 weeks later, still talking about it. And we all do it. I include myself in this when I talk. I'm a sports parent. There are times when I live and breathe this, and you still get it wrong, which shows how complicated it actually is. Even if you know all this, there are still times you will get it wrong. You've got to dust yourself down and say, okay, I can get this better next time and work it, because it is not let's be clear, it's not an easy thing to do.
It's not. And I'm so glad you said that. And I'll tell you that, like, I write about this, I speak about this, but I spent 15 years of my life coaching high school and college athletes, and even I would get this wrong. Because you do care, like you're invested as well. So like you feel that stress or that adrenaline or whatever after competitions. In what I always tried to do, and I didn't always get it right, but before I was about to talk to an athlete, like I would in my head be like, okay, like take a moment, take a deep breath, and try to think of this logically. Like, what is my goal in talking to them in this moment? Right? Don't just like come out and spew and spout and like say what you want to say necessarily, because often what happens is, as parents or coaches or whoever, we default to talking about the things that will make us feel better. So when we see our child's team lose or them mess up or what have you, often we want to tell our child something because it makes us feel better, not because it helps them. And I think pausing in that moment so you can think, okay, it's not about me. Like, what will help them or this team or whoever in this situation. And often that little pause allows us to kind of like get out of our own way. And then also I say, like, as a parent or coach, like, have a way to process what you're experiencing as well. Like, it's normal to be passionate about your kids' success or their sporting careers or what have you. But what you don't want to do is take what you're feeling, experiencing, and everything, and then just like dump it on the kid, because they're already going through whatever with winning, losing, like struggling, all that stuff. You don't want to add to that. You want to be that person who can provide some perspective and also be there to like support, whatever direction or way it goes.
Yeah, and I think there's just something sort of, it's like the Bermuda Triangle is sport. There's something unique that we suddenly think at that moment when our children have been sent off into the big world, they've performed, they've been nervous, they don't want to let themselves down, they don't want to let us down, they don't want to let coaches down, they don't want to let teammates down. And they've gone out there and they've given it absolutely their all. Some days it'll be good, some days it'll be terrible. But we've stood on the side. And we've lived every moment of the game with them because we want it to go well. And I think I was more tired from watching my children play than potentially I was when I was actually playing. But then you think, okay, I'm going to put these two human beings back together. And now let's pick the bones out of what we've just seen in the last 60 minutes. In no other walk of life with two human beings in those state would we decide that is maybe a really good time to have a conversation.
Exactly. The way I look at it is, coming out of your kid's students like big exam or whatever, you guys have your big exams over there. We have it over here in the US. Would you just start grilling your kid on like question number 54 of the test and what happened and like blah blah blah? No, because they're exhausted from going through the exam and just want to like kind of be done with it for a while. I think in sport we often have this need to just like make sense of it, like put our input, all that good stuff. But the way I kind of frame it for parents and coaches is right after a game there's like this sensitive period because stress hormones are high and you can really mess things up. So our number one goal is if you want to have a conversation with your child or your athlete or whatever, in a lot of ways that's fine, that's great, but make sure you're giving the time and space for that stress to come back down, because then you both can like logically think through it. And the other thing I'll say on this topic that is really important is, parents ask me, well, how do I know if I'm getting it right or not? And the answer to that is, does your child want you to be at the game still? Like, are they excited to have you watch them? Are they excited to have you be there? If they are, you've probably got a pretty good balance. If all of a sudden you can see that you're adding stress to their kind of performance and they're like not really wanting you to be there, then that's an indicator of like, hey, you need to rethink your approach. And it sounds strange, but as a coach, like I've had it where several parents I had to tell for a little bit of like, hey, I know you love your kid, I know you're a good parent, but like you're stressing them to death. Like, can you just like not show up for this game or this competition just once to see what happens? And inevitably the athlete tends to kind of free up and perform well. And then that allowed me as a coach to have, okay, this is a conversation we need to have. We need to reframe so that you're positive, you're supporting, you're like not adding to the stress load, because like, a 15-year-old, 18-year-old or whatever year old, like they probably can't handle that.
Yeah, and I think having conversations with your own children, because we've talked about the nuance of all this, that every family, every car journey, every sport, every environment is very, very different. When we look at this topic as a whole, it's going to be different from somebody in the room than somebody else. Because as you say, some parents see it as a quality time in the car. They like to have some of those post-match conversations. The children might be happy having those post-match conversations. But I think the two things or the one thing that you certainly stressed with, I think is important, is that we give them space, but I think we also ask them questions that allow them to reflect on their experience through their eyes rather than how we see it. And there'll be some times when we'll sit there and we'll think, Are you sure we've been at the same game? That you've seen it? And there will be, but it's part of them growing and learning to give them the space that's how they perceive it. And I think that the challenges around, I like that bit, that sensitive period of giving the time, giving the chance for them to reflect, just gives us all a chance not to, as you say, do too much damage. I had a 15-year-old boy and his mum in a workshop a few weeks ago now, and we were talking about how it works well for each other on match day, on competition day. And we were talking about the car journey afterwards, or the car journey to competition. I said to this 15-year-old boy, and we'd done lots of work with the parents, so this wasn't just a random question thrown in as a one-off, but I said, what do you want from mum on match day? And this 15-year-old boy said, quite honestly, I wish she wasn't there. Well, I could have swallowed up. I'm in a room full of parents and kids, and I'm stood there, I'm thinking, how on earth do I get out of this? And he's just said that, and he sat next to his mum. And I said, well, tell me a little bit more. I said, I'm sure mum's a fab mum. And he goes, oh, yeah, she's brilliant for the rest of the week. Calmest mum, she couldn't do more to help me, to support me, do the scheduling and everything else. He said, on competition day, he said, the moment she turns the ignition on, he says she just can't shut up. And he said it wasn't even necessarily about the sport. And he said he just knows that she's worked up and nervous, and it was beginning to have a really negative impact on him. And I think we went away for a minute, and I think they've decided, well, yeah, on the way, we're just going to play music. And I think the boy had said, he said, look, for the first half hour afterwards, I don't want to talk. He said, but then after that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you want me to answer. And it was just a brilliant way of showing the importance of context, but just getting people working together.
I adore that story. I love it because what it does is it gives clarity on the roles that are there. And I think that's so often what we're missing is like we don't have clarity on what we're kind of expected to do, or as a parent, like what our child needs. And if we can have those conversations, like as you said, it's no different from coaching. So I'll tell you, as a coach, like there would be some athletes who I knew before a big competition, I needed to chat them up, man. I need to essentially distract them by like just endlessly talking to them. There were others who were just like, hey, I want to be alone and away from you and what have you. And that's totally fine because like we all have our way to get in the mode or the space to compete or play up to our abilities. And it's just about learning and understanding that. But too often what happens is we don't take the time to either have the conversations or have the awareness to see like, okay, what do you need? And the other part that I think is really important that kind of brings out, and then you talk to is that the type, how we approach it and the type of questions we ask are really important here. So what you asked there is just kind of what I'd call like an exploratory question. You're just kind of, it's almost like laying it up for the kid to take it where he wants to and explain whatever he wants to. I think too often what we do as parents and coaches is kind of ask these almost like accusatory questions of like after the game, well, what happened, in the second quarter in this shot or whatever have you, and we mean well by trying to like help figure things out. But like what we're doing is we're shifting that power dynamic where it's almost like the parent becomes the coach or the person in charge. And the kid is just sat there being like, okay, I just have to answer these in a kind of scared state. And instead, we just want to be able to explore. Like if they want to talk about what went wrong, great. If they want to talk about what went right, great. If they don't want to talk about the game at all right now, that's fine as well. Like let them explore. And then the other thing that you said that I just want to put a pin on it is early on in my coaching career, when an athlete would come off the track, I'd often start like breaking down the race and telling them what I saw. And after the first year or two, I realized that was totally wrong. Because before I tell them what I saw, I needed to understand their experience, what they went through, what they thought went right or wrong, what their perspective was, because like what I saw didn't really matter until I could connect it to their experience. And that's so often it's almost like an we want to contribute as parents and coaches, so we just kind of spew it out on like, well, I saw this and this, and so often we just need to pause to listen to get their experience, and then after that, like we can tie in what we saw or our experience if it's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God, we've covered so much stuff. I hope people are keeping up in this. And things you've said there, we just haven't spent the time. We know with our work and all the work that we're doing and the demand for will you come and work with parents and coaches working with parents and parents working with children and having these conversations, is some of it is just very simply having conversations. We're not we're not creating new bits of rocket or sending things into space. It's actually having the time to recognize people's needs, talk about some of the things, the support they might need. And there isn't a one size fits all, as we've alluded to lots, because it's different for different people in different places. I guess it's having that time to make sense of it. Now, in your book, go on, sorry.
So I wanted to add one other thing that I think is really important there before we go to the book, is that one of the key things you can do as a parent is also step back and observe. So if you're always used to kind of like being on top of the pitch, like right next to the sideline, like get away a little bit and watch your kid from a distance, like, and see what their behaviors and their body language looks like going into the match, and then what happens afterwards. And often what happens is you can get kind of a norm for when your kid is like excited and like happy, and when they're kind of down and want to be left alone. And as a coach, like that was one of the most valuable things I could do, is I could sit like, oh, this person just finished the race and like their body language is negative. That just gave me an indication of like, okay, I'm gonna have to give this kid space. Or if they're excited afterwards, or if they're just like normal, I'm like, okay, I can come up to this person right away and just like start having a conversation. So like observation is a skill. Like step back and kind of get your kids' norms, even on that car ride home. Like look at their body language. Are they on their phone? Are they kind of tucked away? Or are they kind of open and chatty and like wanting to? Like all of that gives you cues to like when it's right to step in and when it's right to just turn the music on and not say anything.
Yeah, and actually that observation piece I think is important. I also think when we're turning up at our children's sport, the management of our expectations, I think, is vital as well, and what we have high expectations of. Now, there's a bit in your book, Steve, that I absolutely loved, and I have going to obviously steal with credits. This bit about when we turn up and we're expecting our children to, I guess, always be better. Yeah, if we step back logically from that, then that means every time we ever went on the track, every time would get better. Every time we went in the pool, we'd get better. And just because we did it last week and did that, that means we should be able to do it the following week. Yet nothing tells us that. So what's your view on how we manage those expectations around performance outcomes, let's say?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is vital and so important, and especially in a world where now our performance is like everywhere. So it's not just like our team at the match knows it, like everybody on social media or online or what have you. It's a different world. So what I like to do is kind of frame those expectations. So too often we're pushed towards like, oh, we always need to get better. And then also I think we're always framed against judging ourselves against like the best version of ourselves ever. So in athletics, we judge ourselves against like the best time we've ever run. Well, by definition, that's a rare occurrence, because like even if we have a good day, like it's very rare to run the best we ever have. Like those become fewer and farther between as we get better and better. So I like to reframe it on like, yeah, our good days are great, but everybody can perform on a good day. Like everybody can perform when the stars align, and we've all been in that space where we're just kind of in that flow and everything's clicking. I like to shift it towards like, how do we show up on our just kind of okay and average days? Like, what does that look like? Like, let's focus on, in the book, I call it raising the floor, not just looking at the ceiling. Like, let's focus on raising our floor, which means like, no matter what, if I can show up and like do this on my okay day, then this is me making progress. Stop judging progress by just the ceiling. And I think what happens over time is when we do that, it focuses on us on like the process of getting better more than just like the number or holistic outcomes, which puts us in a better kind of long-term state and a better motivational state.
Yeah, and that's more likely to lead to obviously the intrinsic motivation that we know people actually need. Again, something we talk to parents about. I think when our children are young, we often not dictate, but we have a pretty big say in what they're going to go and do and what they're going to do. But we know also that when they get to those teenage years and they start making some of their own choices, ultimately, if the drive isn't coming from them and it's been driven too much by us in those formative years, there's a good chance that they will find something else to do that meets those needs.
Exactly. And I'll tell you. So as I said, I spent a decade of my life coaching in the college world in the US, so 18 to 22 year olds. And I can tell you that the kids that I were to recruit where the parent was driving the ship and you could tell that the kid was just like, oh, he kind of enjoyed the sport, but it wasn't his thing. He was going through the motions. Those kids always quit. They either quit or they just went through the motions to satisfy their parent and they never got better, right? It's the intrinsic motivation, that internal drive that needs to drive the ship. And like as parents, like especially when you're looking at teenagers, well, people say, well, how do I help develop that? Well, all you do is you support them, you give them the freedom and the ability to like pursue those things that they want, and like hopefully that flame like grows. But what happens is if you try to smother push, what happens is that just smothers that flame. It pushes it more to the extrinsic drivers of like, well, I'm doing this because my parents want me to, or because like this gets me some notoriety, or I like the trophies, or what have you. When reality is like that works over the short term but fails miserably over the long term. So the best advice I could give for parents is like, just make sure you're not smothering that intrinsic drive. And guess what? If they don't have it in that sport for whatever reason, that's okay. Like encourage them to explore and find something that they do have it in, or that they can apply it towards, or whatever have you.
It's a really tough dialogue, that one. I always say to parents that conversation that they want to give up always has to be on the table. And I know you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'd just dread it if they came and said I'm giving up now. And I say yes, I'd feel like I have a punch in the stomach, because you start thinking of the time, the money, everything that you've done, and then you have to remind yourself that children aren't commodities. And there's no guarantees for all this time and all this investment, but it is hard. You get caught up in a lot of it.
And here's what I would say to parents who are nervous about that is, if the kid really cares about the sport and it's just, let's say, going through a slump, or just like his motivation or her motivation changed for a little bit, if they are really care about it, they're going to come back to it, right? If there's that intrinsic drive, they might say, I'm going to quit for a little bit, but they're going to come back to it. If it wasn't meant to be their thing, if they really don't have that intrinsic drive towards it, then quitting is probably the best thing that they can do in that moment, even though you got all these sunk costs of like, hey, we put all this time or what have you. Because they're going to find that energy, that drive, that motivation, that discipline they developed, and they're going to apply it to something else. Yeah. And your job now shifts to like, well, how do I support them exploring things? Because the reality is, if, maybe you invested from the age of, I don't know, 7 years old to make them a great football player on the pitch. But like, if their drive isn't in it, they're not going to make, no matter their skill or training or what have you, they're not going to make it. No. Like, we know this. Yeah. So like, you got to sometimes let kids figure it out and explore. And on the flip side, I'd say is, if you don't, what happens is kids often develop a lot of resentment because they think, oh, I'm only doing this, coming back to that fear, I'm only doing this to satisfy mom and dad. And we know you are not going to perform well if that is like the driving force.
Yeah, and I've spoken to a couple of children who are playing really high level sport, and I said, "Why are you here?" Just in random conversation as the neutral voice, and a couple of them have said, "Because I don't want to let down mum and dad." And I'm just like, oh no, I just what an awful thing to hear. But I also think mum and dad would be mortified as well. I do think that nobody would ever set out to do that. It's yeah.
We don't. It's often. I'm not. I'm not blaming parents. We often don't know, right? We don't want that either. And for listeners, maybe let me tell a story from my own life. As I said, I was a really good runner in high school, but before that, I loved soccer, so football, and like that was all I cared about. And I remember I was, gosh, I don't know, 12 years old. I was every year you ran the mile in our school, and I remember running the mile in the school because every kid did it, and I came just a couple seconds short of the school record for the mile for whatever 12-year-olds. And I remember the physical education teacher, the coach, saying like, "Oh, Steve, do you want to do this again? Like you could probably get it if you ran again." I'm like, "Oh, sure, I'll try and get for the record." And she was like, you should train because at that time I didn't run track. I didn't train. All I did was play soccer. And I'm like, great, I'm going to train. So I remember I went home to my dad and I said, the coach says I need to train for running because I'm really close to getting the record. And he said, great, tomorrow we'll go out to the track and you can train. Like he didn't know what he's doing either. So we went out to the track and I ran really hard around the track. And running really hard when you're a 12-year-old is exhausting. And I think I almost threw up. And I said, this sucks. I don't want to go for the record in the mile. Like soccer is fun, running is painful. So my dad goes, you know what? Don't go for the record. Like go back to playing soccer. And like I didn't run. But 3 years later, for whatever reason, I fell in love with running and like chose the sport then. And I still got really good. If my dad at that moment would have said, like, Steve, you could be good at running, like, you need to go keep running till you throw up, I probably would have hated the sport. But because I came back to it and chose it on my own end, like, I love the sport. So I think sometimes as parents, like, we freak out and we say, oh, okay, like, this is kind of the end of the world if they do this. But, like, if your kid is good, talented, and motivated in something, if you just keep the opportunities there, if they're meant to find it, if they're meant to be good at it, I think they're going to find their way back to it. And if they're not, then they probably weren't meant to be at it. So just like, calm down a little bit and like, again, go on the journey with them and see where it ends up.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. This is without a doubt been one of my favorite episodes. I've got one last question for you. If we're a parent today and we have to have a conversation with our child about resilience and explaining it to them what it actually is and what it looks like, and how we can best support them in developing it, because maybe one thing we haven't said yet is that this can be developed. This isn't, you're not born with this. These are skills that you can develop based on environments and the people around and what we value and the questions we ask. But how would we define it to our children? And what can we do to help them develop it?
Oh, that's a tough one for children. How would we define it? I love this. Um, I would say pretty simple. It's creating the space to navigate difficult or hard things. And the reason I say creating space and navigating is the way we kind of develop it is we've kind of hinted at this is that we need a bunch of different tools because when we go through difficult, tough things, what happens is we feel this cacophony of feelings, emotions, pain, fatigue. Our inner voice kind of spirals and can go negative and all over the place. We can think about quitting. It's just like chaos. And what we need to do, like real toughness is navigating through that chaos. Sometimes that means accepting the difficult thing in those voices. Sometimes it means like calming yourself down. Sometimes it means saying, hey, this voice or this feeling is like my crazy aunt or uncle ranting on Facebook. I just need to like push it to the side and scroll on by. right? But all of those are different tools. So that's how I would define it for a kid. And what I would say is, okay, how do we develop this for a kid? I would say, you know what? It's all about the mindset to me, which is like embrace the discomfort, embrace the difficult situations, embrace the failures and the losses, and see those as moments of like, hey, this is one of those spots where you can let your mind kind of spiral towards negativity and out of control. Or we can say, hey, we're going to just kind of try and wade through the mess and figure it out. And the more time we spend just kind of wading through the mess, the more we're going to develop the skills so that the next time we're in a similar situation, we're going to be like, hey, I've been here before. Yes, this kind of sucks. Yes, this is difficult, but I think I know how to get through it. And that's how you develop that toughness.
What a way to explain it to our children, wading through the mess. Steve Magness, what an absolute privilege to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. This is going to be an amazing episode to kick off season 4. Hopefully we'll get a chance to have another conversation at some point in the future as well.
You got it. Thanks so much. I love the work that you're doing, and keep these conversations coming because they're wonderful.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.